All right, so are you ready to dive into one of the most, I guess, captivating and controversial figures in the history of the auto industry?
Always up for a challenge.
Okay, good. Because this one's a doozy John DeLorean.
Oh, yeah.
This guy was larger than life. I mean, seriously, he was like a character straight out of Hollywood.
Absolutely.
But was he a genius or a grifter?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, he was like the ultimate car guy, right? But he also got caught up in some pretty shady stuff. So that's the big question we're tackling today.
Grifter or gifted?
Yeah, exactly. We're going deep into DeLorean's life,
Yeah.
his career, everything. We've got articles, interviews, court records, the whole 9 yards.
It's going to be fascinating to see how it all cranked together.
So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
DeLorean's story begins in Detroit.
Born and raised in the Motor City.
1925, right in the heart of the American auto industry. And get this, both his parents worked in the industry.
Talk about being immersed in car culture from day one.
Right? His father worked at the Ford factory, and his mother worked for General Motors.
Wow, that's quite a legacy.
I know. It's like he was destined to be a car guy. But here's the thing. His dad, Zachary, faced a lot of challenges.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, he struggled with English. He had a hard time finding steady work. There was even discrimination because of his Romanian heritage.
It must have been really tough for the family.
Oh, definitely. It couldn't have been easy. And you got to wonder how that impacted young John, seeing his parents struggle, especially his dad.
Right. I mean, witnessing that kind of hardship can really shape a person's drive and ambition.
Totally. It fueled this desire in him to prove something, to achieve a level of success that maybe his dad never could.
Makes sense. I mean, striving for financial security and recognition could have been a direct result of those early experiences.
And you know what the thing is? DeLorean was a smart kid.
He was a bright one.
Like, he excelled in school, both in engineering and music.
Oh, wow. So he was a man of many talents.
Right. He even earned a scholarship to Lawrence Technological University. Impressive.
Yeah, he was definitely going places. But here's a little twist. He didn't immediately jump into the auto world.
Oh, really? What did he do?
Well, after graduation, he actually worked as an insurance salesman.
An insurance salesman?
Yep, and get this, he was good at it.
Really?
Yeah, apparently he saved up a ton of money in a really short time.
So why'd he leave?
I guess it just wasn't fulfilling enough for him,
Yeah, I can see that.
He was drawn back to his true passion, engineering.
So it was back to the world of cars.
Exactly. He landed a job at Chrysler, where he'd actually worked briefly during college.
Talk about coming full circle.
Right. And his timing couldn't have been better?
Why is that?
Well, this was the golden age of innovation in the American auto industry.
So he was right in the thick of it.
Exactly. He was eager to make his mark, and he did.
What did he work on?
Well, he made some key improvements to automatic transmissions while he was at Packard.
Automatic transmission. That's interesting. What was so special about his work? Well, he focused on making them smoother and more efficient, which was a big deal at the time. Because back then, automatic transmissions were known for being clunky, and they guzzled gas.
So he was solving a real problem for drivers.
Exactly. And that's the mark of a true innovator.
Absolutely. He was improving the driving experience for everyday people.
And it didn't go unnoticed. His talent caught the eye of the biggest player in the game, General Motors.
Oh, wow. So he was moving on up.
Big time. This was a major turning point in his career.
1956, right?
Yep, he started at the Pontiac division, and within just a few years, he was promoted to chief engineer.
He was climbing the corporate ladder fast.
Oh, yeah, and then bam, he landed the top jobs at Pontiac.
Head of the whole division.
The whole shebang, and he was only 40 years old.
That's incredible. How did he rise through the ranks so quickly?
Well, he had this undeniable charisma, this magnetic personality that just drew people to him.
Okay, so he was a natural leader.
But he was also a savvy businessman. He understood the market, what people wanted, especially younger drivers.
So he had his finger on the pulse of what was cool.
Exactly. And he wasn't afraid to take risks to challenge the status quo.
And that's where the Pontiac GTO comes in.
You got it. This car was a game changer.
It was a muscle car.
Right. It injected this excitement and youthfulness into the Pontiac brand.
And it shook things up a bit at GM, I bet.
Totally. It challenged their traditional way of thinking.
So what made the GTO such a hit?
Well, first of all, it was a departure from those big, luxurious cars that GM was known for.
Oh, right. It was something different.
It was smaller, sportier, and most importantly, affordable.
He was targeting a new generation of car buyers.
Exactly. DeLorean understood that there were all these young people who wanted performance and style, but they couldn't afford those high-priced luxury models.
Smart move.
And it paid off big time. The GTO was a massive success.
So he was a visionary, in a sense. He saw a need in the market that others were missing.
And he had the guts to go for it, even if it meant ruffling some feathers at GM.
That's often the case with innovators. They're not afraid to shake things up.
But that clash of personalities, that friction between him and the more conservative executives at GM, well, that's going to come back to bite him later.
Oh, I bet it will.
But for now, John DeLorean is on top of the world.
Right.
He's got the Midas touch. Everything he touches turns to gold.
But we all know that things are about to take a dramatic turn.
That they are DeLorean's ambition, his drive to create something truly unique and groundbreaking, well, it's going to lead him down a path filled with challenges, controversy, and ultimately a spectacular fall from grace.
Can't wait to hear about it.
Stay tuned, because in Part 2, we're going to explore his daring decision to leave the security of General Motors and embark on the risky venture of creating his own car company.
This is where things get really interesting.
Oh, you have no idea.
Okay, so last time we left off, John DeLorean was this hotshot engineer at GM.
Right, and high on the success of the GTO.
But he just wasn't content.
It sounds like he always had to push the boundaries.
He did. He had this bigger vision,
Right.
Something he just couldn't achieve within the corporate structure of GM.
Like he was butting heads with the culture there.
Totally. He was this rebellious spirit, this maverick,
Yeah.
who wanted to break the mold, and GM, well, they were pretty conservative.
Yeah, a lot of suits and ties.
Exactly. And eventually, that tension led to a pretty dramatic decision.
1973.
Yep. John DeLorean walked away from his cushy job at General Motors.
To start his own car company?
It was a huge gamble.
I mean, talk about a leap of faith.
He was leaving behind security, a steady paycheck to chase this dream.
So what was the dream?
He wanted to build a car unlike anything else on the market.
Okay.
What he called an ethical sports car?
Ethical sports car. That's kind of an interesting phrase.
Right. It seems kind of contradictory.
Yeah, you don't usually think of sports cars as being ethical.
Well, most people associate sports cars with speed and power.
Recklessness, even.
Exactly. So how do you make a sports car ethical?
That's the million-dollar question.
Well, DeLorean believed that you could combine performance and style with safety and fuel efficiency.
So he wanted a car that was both exciting and responsible.
He wanted to appeal to a wider audience, not just the traditional sports car enthusiast.
So he was really trying to redefine what a sports car could be.
Absolutely. It was a bold vision.
And a risky one.
Oh, yeah. The auto industry is incredibly competitive.
And starting a new car company from scratch? I mean, that's a massive undertaking.
To say the least.
So how did he plan to pull it off?
Well, first he needed money.
Of course.
And that's where things start to get interesting.
Okay, this is where the British government enters the picture.
Exactly. They were facing high unemployment in Northern Ireland at the time.
Right.
And they saw DeLorean's venture as a potential solution.
So they offered him a pretty sweet deal.
Millions of pounds in loans and grants.
To build his factory in Northern Ireland.
It seemed like a win-win situation at the time.
Right. DeLorean gets the funding he needs,
Mm-hmm.
and the British government gets a potential economic boost for a struggling region.
But looking back, it's easy to see that maybe the British government was a little too eager to hand over that money.
Maybe they were a bit too optimistic about the chances of success.
Possibly.
So DeLorean had the factory, the funding, and now it was time to actually build the car.
And what a car it was.
The DeLorean DMC-12.
It looked like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
Stainless steel body, gull-wing doors, designed by the legendary Giorgetto Giugiaro.
It was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before.
It was a head-turner for sure.
DeLorean wanted a car that would make a statement, something that would stand out from the crowd.
And he definitely achieved that.
No doubt about it.
But, as we know, the DMC-12 was ultimately a commercial failure.
Yeah, it's a car that's more famous now than it ever was back then.
So what went wrong?
Well, DeLorean faced a lot of challenges getting the car into production.
Like what?
Production delays, quality control issues. The workforce in Northern Ireland, they were enthusiastic, but they didn't have a lot of experience building high-performance vehicles.
So even with all that money from the British government, he was still hitting roadblocks.
Yeah, it was an uphill battle.
Was it just bad luck, or were there some fundamental flaws in the plan?
I think it was a combination of factors. I
Yeah.
mean, building a car company from scratch is incredibly difficult.
Even for the best.
Exactly. And DeLorean was facing some major headwinds.
Like the global economy.
Right. It was in a state of flux. The auto industry was becoming increasingly competitive and consumer tastes were changing.
And then, of course, there was the 1980 U.S. economic recession,
Oh yeah, that was a major blow to the entire industry.
especially for a fledgling company like DeLorean's.
Sales of the DMC-12 were way below projections, and the company was bleeding money.
So DeLorean was desperate,
He was desperate to save his dream.
and that desperation led him down a very dangerous path.
The cocaine sting.
Yep, in 1982, at the height of his company's financial troubles, John DeLorean was arrested in Los Angeles.
Caught on videotape talking about a drug deal with undercover FBI agents.
It's hard to believe that a man who had achieved so much could fall so far so fast.
It was a shocking turn of events.
So was this a case of a desperate man making a terrible mistake? Or was there something more to it?
Was this the real John DeLorean all along, a con man hiding behind a charismatic facade?
These are the questions that everyone was asking.
And to answer them, we need to look at the trial that followed.
A trial that captivated the nation and raised even more questions about the man behind the iconic car. Okay, so we left off with John DeLorean facing some pretty serious charges.
Caught in that FBI sting operation.
Talk about a cliffhanger, right? So what happened next?
Well, the trial was a huge media spectacle.
I bet the whole world was watching.
Oh, yeah. I mean, DeLorean was this charismatic figure with a fascinating story.
He was like a symbol of the American dream gone wrong.
Right. The prosecution portrayed him as this desperate businessman willing to do anything to save his company, even if it meant breaking the law.
So they were painting him as a criminal mastermind.
Pretty much. But DeLorean's defense team had a different take.
Oh, yeah, they said he was entrapped.
Exactly. That the FBI took advantage of his financial troubles and lured him into this drug deal.
So it was a classic he said, she said situation.
It was a real battle of narratives.
I mean, who was the jury supposed to believe? The smooth-talking entrepreneur or the seasoned law enforcement officials?
Right. It was a tough call.
So what happened?
The trial dragged on for weeks with all these expert witnesses and dramatic testimony.
Sounds intense.
It was. And finally, after all that deliberation, the jury reached a verdict.
Not guilty.
Not guilty on all counts.
Yep. John DeLorean walked away a free man.
Wow, talk about a twist.
It was a huge victory for the defense.
But even though he was acquitted, his reputation was tarnished.
Oh, yeah. The scandal had done its damage.
And his finances were in ruins.
He had to sell off a lot of his assets to cover his legal expenses.
So the dream of the ethical sports car was officially dead.
Pretty much, the DeLorean Motor Company filed for bankruptcy shortly after his arrest.
What about the factory in Northern Ireland?
It shut down. Hundreds of people lost their jobs.
It's a sad ending to a story that once held so much promise.
It is. There's a real sense of tragedy there. But there's one more twist to this story.
What's that?
The DeLorean DMC-12. The car that symbolized both his ambition and his downfall. Well, it achieved a kind of immortality in a way he probably never imagined.
You're talking about Back to the Future.
Exactly. In a strange twist of fate, the DMC-12 became a cultural icon because of its role as a time machine in those movies.
It's funny how pop culture can reshape our perception of things.
It's almost ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. DeLorean's dream of creating this groundbreaking car was kind of realized, but not in the way he had envisioned.
His name became synonymous with innovation and futurism, but through the lens of fiction.
It's a fascinating example of how our collective memory works.
So in the end, what's the verdict on John DeLorean? Was he a visionary or a con man?
I don't think there's a simple answer.
He was a complex guy.
He was a brilliant engineer, but also a deeply flawed individual.
And his story shows us that the line between genius and grifter can be pretty blurry.
Sometimes success can be built on a foundation of risk ambition and maybe even a little bit of self-delusion.
So there you have it. The story of John DeLorean, a man who dared to dream big, but ultimately flew too close to the sun.
A cautionary tale, perhaps, but also a reminder that even in failure, there can be a strange kind of redemption.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the life of John DeLorean. Thanks for joining us.